Hello, Kaya. My name is Alicia Taylor-Jones. I am Acting Manager of Prevention Implementation for Workplaces and Media at Our Watch. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this session today around changing the picture and cultural safety for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in workplaces. Just want a few housekeeping things before we fully kick off. This is a webinar style format, so you are invited to write any comments or reflections in the chat as we go. Myself and other people at the team at Our Watch will be able to respond to those. There's also a Q&A function. And once our beloved Toni has finished her presentation, we will move to a Q&A and we will get through as many of those as we can. So as those questions come to mind throughout the session, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. I also want to mention today is being recorded. So we will be making this recording available publicly after the session. And I also wanted to highlight that we have a graphic illustrator joining us today, Carla Scotto, who is going to be creating illustrations of the conversation and the presentation as it goes forward. We also have closed captions happening today. So for anybody who is hard of hearing or needs extra support with auditory processing, those are available for you. Right, with no further ado, I would like to introduce Toni Hawkins, Practice Lead for the Prevention of Violence Against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Women here at Our Watch. An incredibly deadly woman. We are very lucky to have her here. And she is going to take us through the presentation for the majority of today. Toni, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Alicia. Too kind. I had myself still on mute. Hoping you can all see that now. Yep, great. Okay, thank you. So thank you, Alicia, for that lovely warm introduction. So welcome to today's webinar on the Changing the Picture framework. This framework is a national resource to support the prevention of violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. And whilst we do only have a short time together today, this webinar is just an introduction to Changing the Picture. And we do a more in-depth workshop on Changing the Picture if after today's session you would like to get a further deeper look into this resource. So without any further ado, of course, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we are all dialing in from. For me, that is Darug land in Western Sydney, who have never ceded their sovereignty, and pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past and present, as well as acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. We acknowledge the decades-long work and advocacy of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people working to prevent and address violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. I would also like to acknowledge and honour my elders who have guided me and instilled the strength of a Black woman in me. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So as Alicia has already said, my name is Toni Hawkins and I'm a proud Nyimpaa and Wiradjuri woman, originally from Wagga Wagga, New South Wales, but I now call Sydney home, and I am the practice lead for preventing violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women here at Our Watch. And I will give you just a brief intro to Our Watch for those of you who may not be familiar with who we are and what we do. But before I do go on any further, I want to say thank you for allowing me, or thank you for joining this session to discuss these matters as they relate to and affect my peoples, for you and for you to be open to learning, yarning and sharing, and allowing me to do that with you, to share my expertise and knowledge. So during our short time together today, as I said, I will introduce you and give you a bit of a taster of Changing the Picture. So I will talk about violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, including its impacts and prevalence. I will give you an understanding of the insidious nature of colonisation and its impacts on all levels of society and how to prevent the ongoing impacts of colonisation within your circle of influence. And then we'll look at the drivers of this violence for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and how these result in disproportionate levels of violence against us, and particularly with severe and complex impacts. By then, you should also develop a shared knowledge of how to prevent violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. And then we'll also look at how to implement the actions from changing the picture into your work. And I will also just give you some practical examples or suggestions in how you can go about doing that, or for you to consider. Violence against women is widespread across all levels of our society and touches many lives of many people. And so it's normal to have a strong reaction to what we will be talking through. So on the screen, there are supports available for you after today's session, should you need to reach out to anyone. And additionally, I encourage you to reach out to your Employee Assistance Program, or EAPS, should you have one available. So who is Our Watch? Who are we? So for those of you who aren't familiar, Our Watch is the national leader in the primary prevention of violence against women and their children in Australia. And we work to embed gender equality and prevent violence where Australians live, learn, work, socialise, play, and all the in-betweens. Our Watch is an independent not-for-profit organisation which was established in 2013 by the Victorian and Commonwealth governments, and since then all state and territory governments have joined as members. So we all know that women, to be safe, they must be equal, and to achieve gender equality, we know we must challenge the historically entrenched beliefs and behaviours that drive violence against women in Australia, as well as the social, political, economic structures, practice, and systems that support it. So much like many organisations or companies around the country, we too have a vision. And so our vision is that an Australia where women and their children can live free from all forms of violence. So hopefully you too are inspired by our vision for change, and that is obviously an gender equal, discrimination-free and equitable world is possible, and that we all have a role to play. So now down to the nuts and bolts of what we're here to talk about. So what is violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women? So just before I do go any further, just a note on language. I note many people, practitioners, trainers, workers throughout, their realm of work, whatever it may be, use the terms such as gender-based violence or violence against women interchangeably when discussing such an insidious topic. But for today's webinar and this context, what I will be talking about is that I will be using the term violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. And so we're going to start unpacking what we mean by violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women so that we have a shared understanding of what it is, its prevalence and its impacts. And only by having a strong understanding of the violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and its drivers that we then can take effective measures in the work towards preventing it. So in saying that, gender is definitely a factor in men's violence against all women, and the evidence is very clear on that, but it often plays out differently for my people and our communities. It's important to always remember that non-Indigenous partners make up a significant proportion of men who perpetrate violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, and those men may feel entitled to treat Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women even more poorly than other women because society sees them as lesser. And that is because that's an impact of colonization, which I'll talk a little further about shortly. So gender inequality is yet another thing that came with colonization, and it is not part of our traditional ways. So I want to make it clear that traditionally, our women were loved and respected by men. Women were and continue to be leaders in our communities. We lived in a matriarchal society. We see our women as, we hold them up as queens. You will see, you've probably seen, where we treat our elders, our women elders as, queens. And gender inequality is a violently introduced colonial consequence. And our women and children continue to suffer from this violence and abuse today. So men's violence against women has never been a part of our culture, and it is not our way, and it was not condoned. So I'll briefly go through this because some of you may already be quite familiar with this, having perhaps attended some of Alicia's run practice forums through the Engaging Employers work. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot, basically, to frame it up, like what is violence against women? And essentially violence against women is violence against any woman who identifies as a woman. And it is directed against a woman because she is a woman, or violence that affects women in particular gendered ways. Violence against women occurs in both private and public spaces, and it can take place at home, in the workplace, in public spaces, online, in care settings, and or other places. And it includes physical, psychological, emotional, sexual, financial, social, spiritual, and technological abuse. And this violence can be caused by an intimate partner, family member, date, acquaintance, or stranger, or a work colleague. And sexual harassment is also a form of violence against women. So violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, to be specific, how prevalent is it? So no one should have to experience violence, and we acknowledge that all forms of violence against any woman is abhorrent. And when you look at the prevalence at which violence is perpetrated against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, will you then gain a very clear understanding of why changing the picture and this work that I do, that my sisters do, that our people do is so important. So you can see on the slide that there are some pretty shocking stats there. So basically, very clearly pointing out that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are 31 more times likely to be hospitalised due to family violence-related assaults. We experience violence at 3.1 times the rate of non-Indigenous women. We experience all forms of violence at higher rates than non-Indigenous women, and are 8 times more likely to die due to assault than non-Indigenous women. But these stats only reveal a part of the picture. So some of you may know or have heard of Bridget Brennan, who is a lead journalist for the ABC. And Bridget Brennan was a lead journalist on a Four Corners investigation that reported on Australia's murdered and missing Indigenous women last year. And this investigation found that Aboriginal women are among the most victimised group in the world. So we're not just talking about Australia, we're talking the world. And we're murdered up to 12 times the national average. And therefore our children then are at greater risk of exposure to and the consequences of that violence. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are regularly misidentified as well. as the perpetrators of violence and are subjected to inappropriate responses by police and legal systems. And the subsequent effects are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are more likely than non-Indigenous women to face state-imposed restrictions due to child protection requirements and police matters like bail conditions. So now just opening up to changing the picture, the actual resource. Changing the picture stresses that violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women is not an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander problem, nor should Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people bear sole responsibility for addressing it. This violence is an Australian problem, and it is perpetrated by men of all cultural backgrounds, and preventing it is a national responsibility. So the resource outlines how violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women can be prevented. It describes the drivers of violence, which I'll go through, and then the essential actions that are needed to change and shift the drivers of this violence. So essentially, just to say in a nutshell, the practice framework aims to improve Australia's approach to the prevention of violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and our children, and it is based on formal research and practitioner and community-based knowledge, and the resource aims to inform and support an effective approach to prevention based on specific actions that are directly needed to address the underlying drivers of this violence. So I like to say that because we don't just pull this out of the air and make it up. It is based on formal, academic research, people that have, researched this topic for a lengthy period of time. So why do we need a primary prevention approach to this? So while the level of understanding and severity of violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women may be growing, often the focus is on how to respond to its impacts. And this rightly sees calls for expansion of and improvements to, the crisis and response systems, services and processes. So you've probably seen, shockingly, but rightly so, when we do see a murder, through the media, then you have advocates that come out and, call for more funding for police, more funding for services, more, and that's to expand the response sector. And that is needed. We're not saying that's not needed, but continued work to improve both these aspects of the response system is critical, but the overwhelming need for effective responses to violence is clear from the level and seriousness of the problem. We know that. However, focusing only on responding to violence fails to address its underlying causes or drivers. So continuing, treating the symptoms of a problem can never be enough in the long term. We'll just be going around in a cycle, and we have been for decades. So as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander service providers and advocates point out, this approach also tends to rely heavily on simplistic law and order solutions, and as such, not only fails to address the root causes of violence and the underlying reasons why individuals come in contact with the justice system in the first place, but also, like I said, only perpetuates the cycle, and cycles of trauma and disadvantage, perpetuates systemic trauma, and in the end, it will not make our communities safer in the long term. And it is only by developing a prevention approach, one that identifies and addresses the deeper drivers of violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, that we can then start to reduce and ultimately prevent this violence from occurring in the first place. So now that I've given you a really quick snapshot of what violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women is, so let's look at what drives this violence. So this slide provides an overview of the drivers of violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. So I will discuss this conceptual model in a very high level analysis of what is a very complex issue. But if you're really interested in it for a full explanation of the model or for further info, like I said, we do a longer workshop. Yay, there's a shout out. But you can also refer to our Changing the Picture background paper, which can be found on our website. So basically the intersection between these multiple drivers and the impact of colonisation results in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women experiencing disproportionate levels of violence with particularly severe and complex impacts. So I want to note and really stress that colonisation factors strongly into the reasons that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women experience violence at such disproportionate levels. So just to look at each driver a little further, so if we look at driver 1, which is the ongoing impacts of colonisation for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, families and communities, the impacts include, and you can see them all there on the slide, but obviously intergenerational and collective trauma is a big one. We experience systemic oppression, dispossession and racism. And a lot of us have experienced that on the daily. Since colonisation, we've also experienced the destruction and disruption of our traditional cultures, our family and community relationships, and community norms about violence. And then the personal experiences or exposure of violence. And this includes, racist violence, violence within communities and family violence. And then, of course, there's the condoning of violence within Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Driver 2 is obviously the ongoing impacts of colonisation for non-Indigenous people in society. So obviously there's the racialised structural inequalities of power that benefit non-Indigenous people. There's the entrenched and systemic racism, as social norms, attitudes and practices. And then obviously that perpetration of racist violence and the stereotypes that came from, since colonisation. And we saw this play out quite heavily. It was only a year ago, October last year, during the Voice referendum, where racist attitudes, practices, and even the perpetration of racist violence and stereotypes was heightened during that time. And then obviously there's that social norms that exist within society around the condoning of violence of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And then the insufficient accountability for this violence. Then there's gendered factors, which is driver 3. Now there are gendered factors for non-Indigenous society, and then there is gendered factors specifically for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. I won't go too far into those, but you can see them there on the slide. And essentially it's around, the condoning of violence against women, men's control of decision-making and limits to women's independence in their private life. For example, that could be limited opportunities to secure well-paid leadership roles at work, and then those rigid gender roles and stereotyped constructions of masculinity and femininity. So, that the norms about what it means to be a man and what a woman's role is. And as I said, there are gendered factors specifically for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And that is, the intersection of, racism and sexism creates this double bind of oppression for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. And then the contemporary impacts of imposed colonial patriarchy on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, gender roles, and men and women. Now, I don't have time to go through all of these today, but changing the picture does outline a set of key principles. There are 9 of them that should be followed in order to prevent violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. So these principles for prevention guide the work that you should be doing in terms of addressing this. So I'll just give you a moment to have a look at those 5, and then I'll move to the next one. And I think number 9 is very important, and one that I really love to, when I delve into this, these principles further in our lengthened workshop, non-Indigenous organisations or people, working with us as our allies, but working with us in a genuine way, being culturally safe, but I guess waving the flag for us to say, hey, look, we're here to support you guys. And this is, this is not acceptable, particularly in this day and age, but in our country, in Australia, this should not be acceptable. Okay, so I'll now discuss some essential actions required to address those 3 drivers to prevent violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. And these actions are essential because without them, violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women will not be substantially reduced or prevented. And whilst I do provide these actions, I just want you to note that they are broad and high level, and each overarching action will have many different elements and applications because the drivers of violence lie at many different levels of society, and prevention activities that address norms, structures, and practices at all levels and in multiple settings and contexts need to be considered for each action. So, for example, work addressing racist attitudes or attitudes towards violence at the community or organisational level needs to be accompanied by legislative, institutional, and policy supports that protect Indigenous people's human rights and that promote racial and gender equality, and that ensures accountability for violence and discrimination. So I will provide some practical strategies or tips for you to implement these overarching actions into your workplace. So what could be done to address driver 1, the ongoing impacts of colonisation for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, families, and communities? So what is necessary is that we address the impacts of intergenerational trauma through healing strategies. We strengthen connections to culture, language, knowledge, and cultural identity. Things like challenging the condoning of violence in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And it is also necessary to increase the access to justice to reduce rates of imprisonment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So, some strategies for workplaces. So I would suggest, just overarching, support initiatives that are developed and led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to challenge community norms, attitudes and practices that condone or excuse violence. So that includes, stigma, victim blaming, excusing and intimidating women seeking to report, and to promote the values of respect and gender equality. So leaders should advocate, leaders allocate resources to primary prevention activities that address gender inequality and the drivers of gender-based violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. Leaders actively advocate for the importance of diversity and inclusion and publicly support diversity campaigns within a workplace's context. And when the workplace organises or is represented in public events or forums, deliberate efforts are made to ensure Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander speakers and rich culture is featured. So you're demonstrating, you know, that allyship. You're demonstrating, you know, you are for our culture and those sorts of things. And we in turn see that. Workplaces acknowledge the impact of colonisation on past and current practices, including on experiences of violence in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and take active steps to address these effects. When you might be conducting, say, research-based activities or surveys into the prevention of gender-based violence, you partner with expert organisations or people with lived experience, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community-controlled organisations or experts that can assist you with those types of activities. So similarly to what I've just done through Driver 1, what can be done to address Driver 2? So I think a big one here is implementing a range of strategies using multiple mechanisms in multiple settings to challenge and prevent racism and discrimination, both interpersonal and institutional, and promote equality and specific human rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So for example, you can include, you know, a zero tolerance for racism in your policies or, for example, your code of conduct. And that goes for, you know, it could be your service users, customers, but also your staff. Increase non-Indigenous people's understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, cultures, knowledge, and perspectives, and then provide, and the significance, and value these are afforded in Australia. And this can be achieved through formal and informal education and public communication practices. So for example, you've probably attended or have heard of what we call cultural competency sessions, or, you know, the old school term we used to use is cultural awareness training. And they can be formal or informal, but they should be delivered by local cultural experts. So based and engage with somebody local to you. So if you're in Sydney or Western Sydney, you engage a local cultural expert from Western Sydney, and so on and so on. And so celebrating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, marking days of significant cultural significance. You know, NAIDOC Week is a huge one for us. Have your workplaces celebrate that. Identify and address any racist or discriminatory aspects of your policy, practices, programs, and services, and those of any partner agencies or organisations that you work with. So staff or workers can be involved in developing and promoting campaigns that promote gender equality, racism will not be tolerated, and anti-discrimination and harassment. Now, following the same form as we did with driver 1 and driver 2, what could be done to address the gendered factors specific to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? So I would say here, very broadly, things like actions should enable and support the development of specific Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women's leadership strategies and diverse models of leadership. So with the aim of amplifying Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women's voices. And then obviously prevention work needs to challenge gender stereotypes and the patriarchal gender roles within women and men right across Australian society. And this includes creating specific culturally safe opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and men. So I would say a big one here and a very easy to do. The workplace has mechanisms to identify gender and racial bias within its casual, contract and permanent part-time and full-time workforce, and has strategies in place to address bias, including increasing the proportion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in permanent part-time and full-time positions. So before I do finish up today, I just want to let you sit with this for a second and I know that was like a big whoa, and you're probably taking it all in, but to think about what is one thing you will commit to doing in your journey to prevent violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. You might like to throw it in the chat. Feel free to. So I'll just let you reflect on that for a moment. And I'll hand over to Alicia. Did we want to throw to the Q&A?
Yeah, happy to do Q&A. Thank you so much, Toni, for all of that. I actually had one question that I wanted to unpack with you before we go into the rest, and this was a discussion that I had the privilege of being involved in. But I know some businesses here might be aware of the idea of cultural leave as an additional sort of condition in workplaces that supports Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a discussion around cultural leave, but also it was unpacked into recognising cultural responsibility and colonial load and separating those two things out. And I'm wondering if you have sort of a view or be able to describe a bit why something like cultural leave is valuable from those two sort of perspectives.
Certainly. Okay, well, I guess I should start with the premise that, our watch, we do have a cultural knowledge recognition package for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff. And that is to, I guess, recognise the expertise and knowledge that we bring to our roles. So we not only bring our professional experience or our skills that we bring to specific roles, but we also bring our cultural knowledge. And that is something that is deeply embedded with us, and for us to share with, I guess, non-Indigenous people is something quite, how should I say, it's a privilege for non-Indigenous people to be able to hear our cultural knowledge and how that then can better our workplace. and how you then respond to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, whether it's service users, whether it's clients, whomever it may be. And ultimately, what we bring to the workforce is that additional, I guess it's an additional expertise that we bring. And so cultural leave is something, because we do lots of the time. So for example, I'm in my role as a, violence against women subject matter expert, but I also bring my cultural knowledge along with that. And so I'm often, asked questions about, okay, well, for, an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person, you know, can you give me advice on this? And can you give me advice on that? And, we're constantly being asked for to provide education, if you like, around our peoples. And that is what we see as, I enjoy it, but it genuinely comes with a cultural load. And it is heavy, it is a burden on us. And so workplaces now are starting to recognize the load that it does put on us, because when we leave the office, we don't finish work, so to speak. So we are still within our, we are who we are at work, we are who we are outside of work, and it never, we're always walking in those two worlds. I don't know if I explained that very well.
No,
Yeah.
I think you have. So you bring additional dimensions of yourself to the workplace. That's
Yes.
not just about you being your authentic self in the workplace, but it's this incredibly valuable contribution of cultural knowledge and community knowledge that non-Indigenous, workers don't have access to and don't have inherent as part of,
That's right.
they are and what they bring to the workplace.
Yes, much more articulate. Thank you.
Maria's put a question in the chat saying, can workplaces recognise the efforts of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with remuneration for additional cultural load?
Yes, absolutely. So a cultural knowledge recognition package, if you like, does include cultural leave. So for example, if I can share, and it is on our website, so it is publicly available, but something that Our Watch is very proud of, that has just been recently introduced. The cultural knowledge package allows up to 5 days extra cultural leave, and there is an additional $5,000 within remuneration to recognise the additional load that is put onto staff. Thank you, Roxana.
Yeah, I was just going to read it. So thank you, Roxana. Roxana, for those who aren't reading the chat, says it makes me so sad and angry that you need to educate and even have these sessions. We're very grateful for the information. Thank you. I think the world could benefit from moving to the First Nations matriarchal culture and way of living. I'd like to see a higher participation of First Nations people in my workplace, and will work to influence hiring managers and recruiters to improve in this regard. That's awesome. Thank you, Roxana.
Thank you.
And I think that is, from a workplace perspective, that's one of the first stuff is in that recruitment phase. I know I've worked in a lot of workplaces and they haven't engaged sort of meaningfully with these ideas in this work because they've gone, we don't have any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And of course you go, well, then that's your problem there. Because if you don't even have Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander staff working in your workplace, then you're right at the beginning of this journey as far as barriers. People can't even get in the door, let alone be able to contribute meaningfully and thrive and move into leadership roles. So for some of the organisations watching, the average overall of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia is about 3.5%, 3.7% of population. Toni, you might know.
I thought it was more 3.2.
Okay.
It could have, since we did the last census, it might have grown. Yeah. So around that. Yeah.
3 point something
Yeah.
percent would be a representative level of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander employees to have in your workplace. So if you're not sort of hitting that, your workplace is not representing the community within which it operates.
That's right.
At a baseline level. The other part of that piece, though, is that you may very well have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff. They're just not telling you. People may not be disclosing the fact that they are an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person because they don't feel safe to actually do so in the workplace and feel that either disclosure might come with some form of penalties in the form of racism or culturally inappropriate assumptions and remarks, or that it might affect their career trajectory and prospects. So I know Toni's spoken about cultural safety, and I think well, actually, it's even before the recruitment piece, because there's no point recruiting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander talent and people into your business if they're going to leave really quickly because it's not actually safe for them to be there. So,
Nailed it.
so you need to start looking. First steps, I think, around workplaces: get your data, work out who is in your workplace, who's missing from your workplace, and then put in some steps to actually make sure that you're ready and willing to bring in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander talent, and of course, in this context, particularly women, and that you're setting them up for success. Because the worst possible thing is to bring in people and then find that you're actually creating quite a hostile environment, or one in which they're not going to be able to progress. Maria's asked, would adding this to employment descriptions when recruiting help? I was going to say, I know a lot of recruitment ads say, you know, we encourage applications from Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander applicants. I think it probably needs to go a step further than that, that if you're wanting to attract those people, you need to then actually outline, because we have a remunerated cultural loading, or we offer cultural leave, or we celebrate NAIDOC week, or we we have an Aboriginal or a Torres Strait Islander employee reference or advisory group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff that come together and advocate on behalf of those employees. I think at the recruitment stage, you need to go further in being transparent about what actually are you doing to support this talent in your workplace. Toni, from your lens, what do you think would help to get people in and staying in workplaces?
Yeah, I think you've absolutely nailed everything that you've said. I don't think I can need to add anything further. No, love. Yeah, I think even though there's that, you could have an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander employment strategy. You could, you know, within your workplace, that could be just something that leaders, you know, advocate for and want to. I guess it's about encouraging leaders or executives, or whatever the term may be, noting that there's many different workplaces in this webinar today. But it's a way of, I guess, challenging your workplace to, you know, go, you know, host Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander recruitment to be able to get more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the door. And I can assure you that once you do, the rest of the community, see that. And the benefits that come from having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within your workplace, you will see it. You will clearly see it. The community then see that you are, you know, you're serious about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. You are showing allyship. Um, you're basically just being a decent human being, if I can just put it so bluntly. Um, and then you're more likely to, whatever your workplace may be, for example, if it's a supermarket chain or what have you, if you've got Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people working for you, you're more likely to get Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander customers, because we see ourselves around, um, and we know that it's a culturally safe environment.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, so you could set yourself a target, and so those strategies could say, okay, within the next, 2 years, we hope to get to X percent. And then you have all these, I guess, measures in place in how you go about doing that. And you can have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander identified recruitment. It is in legislation.
Yeah. Thank you, Toni. Your oh, sorry, I just saw a message to the host and panels there. I'll get to it in a minute. One of the things I was wanted to pick up on was you talking about getting in customers and the fact, if Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people see themselves reflected within, a workplace, they, feel obviously like more comfortable to come in and support with their money and their patronage and everything else. The work that we've been doing with the Engaging Employers project has found that in those customer to staff relationships, we know that sexual harassment as a form of violence against women in general is a prominent problem, but that it is compounded for both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and women of colour from a racism perspective. So customers, I think ever since the pandemic and COVID, we've seen an escalation in those customer service roles being really facing the brunt of people's frustrations and bad behaviours. And I don't think that's particularly abated over the last couple of years. But young women in particular, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in particular, seem to draw the ire of customers all the time in bad behaviors. And so from a workplace perspective, one thing I wanted to call out is have some strategies in place around how do you support your frontline workers, particularly those who are more vulnerable to these types of behaviors from the general public and customers. So women in general, young women, women with disabilities, women who are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, and women of colour, and women with accents, in particular, if they're talking to and from customers, often get backlash as well. Make sure that you actually have some processes and procedures and support sort of in place so that your staff know how they can respond and mitigate the harm and step themselves away. They have permission to remove themselves from those situations, and that they have support to take it further in relation to services like telcos, utilities and the like. We've worked with organisations around their right to actually terminate services for customers who behave abhorrently towards their staff. So that certainly acts as a particular deterrent to those behaviours, and you can make those behavioural expectations clear through signage or different sort of signalling throughout the storefront and your business.
Yes, absolutely. I would definitely agree with not just having a a worker, remove themselves, but then there has to be accountability on those that perpetrate those behaviours.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not on the staff member to bear the brunt of that.
Yep.
We do have just a few minutes left, so I wanted to take the last few moments to check in with Carla Scotto, our graphic recorder. Carla, could you talk us through a bit what you've gleaned from the conversation?
A lot. This was a really great talk given by Toni. I wanted to get as many of like the stats in. There were quite a few. This is such a hard topic to visualize. So I have found with a lot of Our Watch recordings that I've done, I do tend to focus more on words than images because it can just feel a little bit inappropriate to depict some of this stuff. I particularly wanted to expand, which I will probably have to do after because it's such a big idea, a way to visualize how Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander women they experience both racism and sexism, and how I think you almost used the word like they were invisible, or they were like it impacted them doubly. So I definitely want to come back to that, but I've included illustrations and little connotations about colonization throughout, so that it sort of feels like the way employers should be treating colonization. They should keep referring to it and not ignoring it. I've highlighted it maybe 3 or 4 times throughout here because it is just consistently the underlying issue. I really loved the way Toni talked about how in matriarchal Aboriginal society these issues did not exist. Yeah, I don't think I can do you as much justice as the power that your words held.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla. And with like a minute to go, I just want to say a huge thank you, Toni, for all that you contributed in bringing this session to life today. I know it's talking about cultural load, like this is not only talking about a topic for the workplace to share, but this is embedded, of course, in your identity and experience, and it's deeply valuable, and I just want to let you know that it's deeply appreciated. So thank you so much for guiding us through all of this content today.
No, thank you. It's been my absolute pleasure. And just a short little wrap up. If people do want any further information on the screen, there are some links. So you can find Changing the Picture, and also the workplaces Lead the Change resources as well on our website. And then, of course, the workplaces team contact if you want some more information, which is equality and respect at ourwatch.org.au. And finally, if anybody does want to reach out to me specifically for any further information, my email is also on the screen. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We have hit the hour. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and afternoon. Thanks for joining us today.